So, welcome everybody. I'm here with Corey Dowds, and we're going to be talking about Saturn today. Corey is an astrologer that I've known for a number of years since I moved to Asheville. He was one of my first students. He's the only one that successfully made it through the certification course that I used to have. He's the only one that survived of them all. I think that plaque might be on the back there. Is that it, or is that someone else's? Yeah, there it is. So anyway, it's good to have Corey with us, and he sent me a text earlier showing me a sign since we're going to be talking about Saturn, and it was an alligator in his backyard, which is a symbol for Capricorn, a symbol for Saturn. Now, these questions are going to be coming from questions that you asked from my Facebook page way back in December. It's taken us a little while to get to it. But before we get into those, I just want to welcome you, Corey. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, everything going all right in your end of the world?
Yes, it's been a nice day. Spring is almost here. So, yes, it's very good.
Crocodile didn't eat anybody?
No, he did not. I consider that a very good omen. It was not a scary, dangerous omen. It was just him sunbathing. That's one of the first warm days we've had over 70 degrees. So, it's nice.
Nice. Perfect. All right. And Corey, just for those of you who are wanting to get in touch with him later on, we'll say this later, but his website is eyeoftheveda.com. So if you're interested in learning more about Corey or reading some of his blog articles, you can find him at eyeoftheveda.com. All right, Corey, we've got about 5 questions for you today. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. And all of these deal with Saturn. There were a few other questions, but I didn't think we'd be able to get them all in. Now, the first question that was sent to us was, why are Saturn transits in Scorpio more destructive than in other signs? Or why can they be? Because they're not always, but why can they be more destructive in Scorpio than other signs? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, well, we just got a good bit of practice with that since he just moved through Scorpio and won't be back there for almost 30 years. Saturn in Scorpio, it's not the worst place for him, but he is in an enemy sign. He's in the sign of Mars, which is one of his enemies, but it's a water sign, so it's considered to be thirsty, not fully starved. So from a subjective standpoint, Saturn feels it. If this were a fire sign, if Scorpio were a fire sign, it would be a little bit more intense. He would be starved, but just being thirsty, he feels like he can't get everything done in the amount of time allotted to him by Mars. And so when you have that sort of situation, you have someone who has to learn to pace themselves oftentimes when it comes to work and with meeting deadlines and getting things done, because no matter how much they get done, they oftentimes still feel like it wasn't enough, oftentimes. So that's one of the struggles that you can get in Scorpio when Saturn's in Scorpio.
And that's going to be common when Saturn's in Aries as well. It's a fire sign, sure, and Saturn is debilitated in Aries. But what I'm trying to get at is that Mars-Saturn energy, what you just described, that's usually what happens when you get these two energies coming together, correct?
Yes. Mars is the warrior or the knight or a policeman. Saturn is an old man or an impoverished person or a homeless person. And all you got to do is read the news for the last few years of Saturn being in Scorpio, and there was a great deal of talk of the way that the police treat impoverished people or homeless people or minorities or people who are in some way not at the same level of status as the norm. Saturn rules people who are outcasts or outsiders or some way set apart from the rest, from the norm. And, we had all those shootings and all the political things going on. That there's definitely a lot that probably related to Saturn and Scorpio there. But in the same way, in Aries, you get the same issues, but even more so because it's a fire sign. And a big part of the problem of the Saturn debilitation is really not taking care of their time, not using it wisely, and rushing when they should take their time and taking their time when they maybe should rush. It's one of those things.
Right. And so with Scorpio, since it's the natural 8th sign of the zodiac, the 8th sign dealing with our deeper psychological states, our own personal transformation. Do you have any thoughts on how Saturn's energy works, not only being in a sign of Scorpio, the sign of Scorpio, a Mars sign, a water sign, but also the fact that it is the 8th sign of the zodiac?
Well, it can give one a lot of interest in occult things like that. And it can, there's some good to that. It can make you want to categorize and systematize the occult or try to see things in a more objective way. But it also can show that one is dealing with some vulnerabilities in that area, or their weakness is in the things they hide from people, the Scorpio side of life, or the eighth house side. My father actually has Saturn Scorpio. I know a lot of people who have Saturn Scorpio for some strange reason. So I've definitely seen that. It's people. The people that tend to have a lot of vulnerable things come up in their life. You know what I mean? If you have that in your chart, but even in transits, if you have a sensitivity to eighth house things, you might have had a lot of those issues over the last few years. And you basically it really helps to be able to make peace with your, whatever your emotional vulnerable things are,
Right.
and making peace and accepting it and having some degree of detachment, all Saturn thing.
Right. And that's coming from that eighth house, which can be, our deeper psychological transformation or our deeper sense of safety, right? And then
Yes.
Saturn, which represents our liabilities or our psychological complexes. So now, when Saturn goes through Scorpio, we might become more aware of our psychological complexes, or more aware of those things that we really have to look at within ourselves in order to find that deeper kind of peace.
Yes, I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, and that would make sense as to why that might be a difficult time period. Because if, like you said, if you're sensitive to it and it comes up by transit and you don't look at it, you don't take the time to work through it patiently as Saturn would require, well, it seems like that would make you suffer a bit. Not in a funny way.
No, it's yeah, and there was a lot of issues over the last few years of that transit. It just ended, so the last 3 years, for the viewers, just kind of loosely, you can consider this influence was going on, and think about just on a mundane level, all the talk of equality within the masses and the overlooked people and in the world. But then there's also, for us spiritual people, it was a time when, for a lot of people, to break through all of your vulnerable issues, maybe not break through, but to face what you maybe hadn't faced for the last 30 years, or since he had been there previously.
Right.
Something we ignored, maybe, parts of ourselves that sort of come up and show themselves.
Right. Yeah, I did find that quite a few of my clients over these past, 2.5 years, were dealing with those issues. And I kept saying, wait, Saturn's going to move out of Scorpio, tropical Scorpio, that is. Saturn's going to move out of tropical Scorpio, and you'll have some resolution to this. You'll have some deeper insights into it. And they didn't believe me, as they never do, because it's hard to think about that when you're in it. But then once you see it happen, then it's almost like a weight can be relieved, So, and one quick thing I want to say about that before we get into the next question is that we do need to be aware that with these kinds of transits, that what we're talking about are very general transits, okay? Meaning that if you experience that, well, then maybe there's something in your chart that speaks to Saturn, 8th house, Saturn, Scorpio, or Saturn, Mars energy. But if I would say to you, yeah, you're going to get relief after Saturn moves out of tropical Scorpio, but then your moon ends up being in Sagittarius, well, you're going to say that's not true. Because once Saturn goes over the moon, you're going to feel a bit heavier. So we do have to remember that what Corey and I are talking about here are general transits, and there may be other things in your chart that we need to look at. But anyway, this leads me to the next question, unless you have another thought on that.
Actually, I do. There's a good example of that recently. A friend of mine, he has Saturn with K2 in the 6th house. So he's a Gemini, and it's in the 6th house. And he has some other difficult health placements in his chart, and he got diagnosed with epilepsy during the time that the Saturn transit through Scorpio we're talking about. And as a side note, Scorpio and the nodes do have a lot to do with the nervous system and epilepsy, and that could all be talked about. We could do a whole other class on that. But then, so I told him, I was like, look, this is your Saturn return, this is a big part of it because it's indicating health things, and, you got diagnosed with this. A lot of our friends, we should have listened to you more when you're talking about these things. But once Saturn left and entered Sagittarius back in October, he was like, all these things I've finally been like breaking through. I feel like I'm finally not so stuck. He's like, yeah, I want to get a reading and want you to forecast some things. And so I did. I was like, yeah, your Saturn return is finally that 2.5 year period. I was telling you, just hang in there, like what you're telling clients.
Right.
It finally passed, and then he was able to get his license back because he had the epilepsy where you couldn't drive because you could have a seizure. So he was able to get his license back. He started. He's almost graduated school. He went into school at the beginning of that period. He's finally, Saturn's releasing him from a lot of this bondage or this feeling of being held back and held down. And that's a big feeling of Saturn. If you're feeling that in your life, oftentimes it has a lot to do with what Saturn's doing in your chart, Right. So now Saturn has moved into Sagittarius, and it's not ideal though, because that's where his Atmakaraka, the sun, is at. So there's Sun-Saturn issues coming up, but it's still much better than where he was at,
Right. Yeah. Going from the 6th house of health to maybe more relationship related things, which is still not fun, but it's probably better than health problems.
That's exactly right. I was like, you're going to have to really do a lot more of the servant type work in your relationship. You're going to have to do a lot more, and you're going to feel that heaviness there more so. And he's been working on that. So everything's good.
Good. Yeah. And that point you bring up is excellent about as Saturn transits through a sign, that's where typically a person's going to feel held back, or they're not going to be able to have their major breakthroughs. And I got to tell you, doing remedial measures for Saturn, as you mentioned, service in relationships, or even just serving people in general. These things, they might not necessarily help you make the breakthrough, but they'll help you have peace around it. And they'll help you understand that this is part of paying off some of your karmic debt, because that's what Saturn represents, where your responsibilities lie. So any of you who are having Saturn transits in any house or sign, figure out what sign it is, what house it's in, and that 2.5 year period of Saturn's transit, it'll indicate a time period where you're going to be doing some hard work. It might not feel like you're getting rewarded for it, and it might not feel like you're making any progress, but it's part of the very basic foundational stuff you have to do to move through your karmic load, as they say. So
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the next question here. This is nice. It's kind of leading all together. So the next question is, can you provide some meaning of Saturn conjunct Mars in the birth chart? So I guess what they're asking is, what are some things that we can take that we can understand about Saturn and Mars in the birth chart? And if you have any examples with particular signs or houses, that would be excellent.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so Saturn conjunct Mars, this is sort of overlapping with what we talked about Saturn and Scorpio, because Mars is an enemy of Saturn's. Is considering Mars an enemy because Saturn has to accomplish deeds. He has karmas to do. They're not always fun. There's a heaviness there. And Mars is about ideals and concepts. Maybe not ideals, that's more Jupiter, but he's about concepts of, this is right, this is wrong. We have a code. Knights and warriors have codes that they live by. They can't just do whatever they want when they want. And Saturn is more of a natural planet who kind of does need to go at his own pace, at whatever that pace is, because Saturn is our individuality on another level, like our complexes, what unique psychological complexes each person has, and they're all so different.
And when you say natural, you mean just he likes to be natural? Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He kind of knows that everyone is so different and unique that he isn't so hung up on if he fits into the box that Mars wants him to be in or that the sun wants him to be in. So you get a little bit of friction there. Another way to say it is the person is too focused on their issues and their weaknesses and their liabilities. The Saturn, the lack. And then there's Mars with the, Mars' symbol is a circle with an arrow, like focusing energy. So Mars is pointing at that Saturn saying, this sucks about you, whatever it is, this is too slow, this is not good enough. And so then you push harder, or part of you wants to push harder, but then part of you can only go so fast, and so eventually a mistake's going to happen, an accident will happen. So that's why oftentimes Saturn Mars is an indication for accidents in traditional Vedic astrology, a Saturn-Mars conjunction, say in the 4th house, there might be an accident in the car or, driving or with the mother or something.
Or violence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because why are people violent? Because they're frustrated.
Yeah, that's another thing. Violence, domestic violence, if it was in the 4th house. If it was in the 10th house, maybe become a cop because you're going to be violent in your careers or whatever anyway. Or I'm not saying that really, but so.
Well, any kind of career that requires that you be able to channel violence, may benefit from a Saturn-Mars combination.
Yeah.
So and police work, military, those sorts of things.
Yes, and there can even be in good dignity, particularly when you get a Saturn, Mars, and Capricorn conjunction. That's really unique because they're both in really good dignity, but they're still fighting each other. And some people who do really great, dignified, great, good karma things still fight with themselves all the time. And that's really fun how we can see that and really pick that apart from so many angles. Another thing about Saturn and Mars conjunction is that it can kind of be difficult for health at times because your part of you is wanting to go much more than the part of you that is your longevity. Saturn can actually afford to go. So you can burn up longevity real quick. Another thing is, well, let's just, explain the Avashta. It's an agitation Avashta, Shobita or whatever. And so when that's happening, when they're conjunct, Mars is agitating Saturn and Saturn's agitating Mars. So it is one of the tougher conjunctions to have, but there can be good things that come out of it. One of the main things I counsel people on is to not try to feel like doing so many things is going to take away your sense of lack. Right. A lot of times those people, when they have Mars and Saturn together, they just think, if I just do one more thing, if I just did one more amazing reading, or once I get this interview done and it's on YouTube, I'm just successful all of a sudden, or I'm happy. And that's just not the case,
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of people, just what you said, I have a lot of clients with that because I also have that, which is fascinating. The thing
you don't have a conjunct though, do you?
No, mine's not conjunct. So I've got a little bit of a relief from that. But but at the end of the day, no matter how much you do, like you were saying, it still doesn't feel like it's enough. So you get these real overachieving people who are successful like you wouldn't believe, and sure enough, they've got Saturn, Mars, either conjunct or mutually aspecting each other, and they want to know, when are they going to be happy? When are they going to feel relief? And you just have to tell them that's a psychological thing. You have to figure out a way to make peace with that in yourself, because there's not one more thing you can do, and it's going to occur typically in the houses that they fall in, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's yourself, the 1st house, or career, 10th house, or with health. I just saw a person who had Mars and Saturn in the 6th, and they're just so focused on health. And Rahu was there as well. And I had to make the comment. I was like, well, you're probably a little bit, what's the word when you're afraid of getting sick all the time?
Hypochondriac.
Yeah, a hypochondriac. I said, that Saturn Mars does make it so you need to pay attention, but that Rahu is going to put such a spin on it that you're always going to be afraid of every little thing and having to do everything just perfect with your health, So anyway, didn't want to take away from your talk there, but
I'm sure you get a lot of this in Asheville.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I actually have this thing too. I have Mars in Aries, and he's aspecting Saturn in Sagittarius, and it's 45 Arupas or something. So it's pretty strong. So I have this as well. And throughout I can relate to all of this. I get a lot of clients with this too, and this happens in my life as well. I have to work on that a lot. I have to tell myself I'm just doing an interview, and whatever I do, whatever happens, it happens. But yeah, it's not. I do not try to make my actions validate that sense of lack or that sense of That's something that we have to learn. It is just a psychological thing.
And one good point to remember, just briefly, Corey brought up the Virupas, or the points with aspects. Now he mentioned. I think you said Mars in Aries and Saturn in Sagittarius. Is that right?
Yeah, so his eighth house aspect is 100, and then it's a little bit less. Yeah.
Right. So if you're just looking at a chart like that, you might scratch your head and say, well, that's not an aspect because we're used to thinking of Mars only aspecting like the eighth away, which would be Scorpio. But we have to remember that Parashara talks about the specific degrees of aspect. And so based on where Mars is placed in that sign of Aries and where Saturn is placed in that sign of Sagittarius, there is a potential for there to be a significant aspect there. So I just wanted to throw that out there because I know people are going to be asking about that.
Yes.
Good. So that's Saturn and Mars. And the next part of that question, they seem to want to know about Saturn and every planet. So the next one dealt with Saturn and the moon, Saturn-Moon conjunctions. So do you have any reflections or thoughts on Saturn-Moon conjunctions?